I'll show you what I just ordered.
Black Friday.
That's great. So I know.
I ordered that one.
Oh, I like the one, but I like the one that you said that all those places in the house and in the Senate and the legislature that gets on the back. I like the I like the polymer.
Yes, I was just showing that to
I like the polymer. Oath of office. Yeah, pretty great. Don't want to lose that. I like that's like a go now. Stick to your knitting.
Just
Go now. Stick to your knitting. Go now. I been in
US, 1 hour and 20 minutes.
I would bet I fell asleep.
US?
Yeah.
It's a meeting. It's
a meeting.
It is.
Lots of interesting.
Yeah, I will. So you're out on the couch and fly on the feet. Maybe that's the last thing some of that when I fly back. Go. Oh,
If you get more, you need to stay.
just get the family.
It's like about the same.
In my computer.
like not just online, not just on computer.
Did council grants to be open?
Gonna go hang out. I wish. I love that place.
I'm sure you know.
But I'm so running now.
Britt and I have been talking about ideas for council.
Josh, so you get my phone.
All right, great.
Go on then.
We'd also have to leave.
I don't know what. but-
Josh is leaving for Christmas Island.
Is he really? Programs. That's akin to the
Yeah.
school grant program kind of, and actually very much.
One flight a week.
Like you successfully completed 4 years.
Last year you got delayed.
Especially if you have your family.
Yeah, so like
You get stuck there.
providing sections for more neighborhood stuff. So
Yeah, they got stuck there and then they bring all the food and stuff in on the meetings.
Yeah.
So
then it was like rations?
Well, he said it was fine because he doesn't restrain. He
Yeah.
said everybody else who ran
Instead of like let them, dictate everything to us,
was
like,
primarily.
I think council being a bit of a stamp on something. Because see, these are our priorities.
This is he goes for fun with his friends, go on to live.
Such a random.
Nobody goes there.
Yeah.
So they, like, fish that you would be catching, like, 1 or 2 if you were
Did finally, like, I've been using
You're
these
catching
ones and everything, but finally
Yeah.
bought one with a proper lid because it's sealed on my phone.
I'm
Time. Yeah, it's a drag, right? That's a drag.
Well, when you fish for fish for the because they do themselves, or you can see
It's wild that day. So,
It's like, do you
yeah,
want to
but
talk
yes,
about
I
it?
absolutely
Even
am.
a tiny bit, it's like, is there surfing? He's like, no, it's really windy. And it's like, is there like beaches? And he's like, no, it's garbage everywhere. And
We're probably gonna have a conversation at some point around kind of like establishing a bit of a culture of like, you know, when conferences come on, what is reasonable, how many, how do we rotate terms?
Didn't know like you had mentioned.
Yeah, this council is more interested in going.
Anyways,
And
and
it's
then
not
it was
every
so
council, which is
popular.
fine, but it's all in their budget envelope so far, but
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing like that when I went.
To be honest, I really getting married in second.
Well, I only went on the
I don't want to.
Maybe we gotta just say
The travel costs are
Yeah, yeah,
And that's a secret.
No.
I think the,
no, at the same time, I remember when I started.
They were pretty strict when we were there.
Doug was at a conference and he was like, well, I'll just pay for it myself. I was quite adamant that you not, like, you know, like, you might have a financial capacity to do so, but there are many who can't, and so it's not fair to like have one person be able to go to those things and everything for themselves.
Yeah.
Like, we need to have a fair way of distributing, you know, the opportunities that we Yeah, yeah, and you know.
I would say, I would say
That's a good one. It looks so good.
Well, yeah, I'm already speaking at it, so. Yes, I am. I just totally forgot it, but it was Elise who actually.
I've watched season 1.
I was just. It is an
If you have full report on it, I'll be gone.
Focus.
Oh, you didn't watch it?
Yeah, it is, it's very, it is amazing, but then.
And Sachi Pearl is there.
Actually,
I like her.
She's Pocket the Fight.
Yeah,
She's,
yeah.
I mean, I sort of a little different. Yeah, I like her too. She's very articulate.
She's funny.
Yeah.
mainly I started off in oil and then I went into mining and now
Oh, they think we would just moved on away. They didn't mean to give us more.
Do you know me?
Do I think the beach? Of course you could.
something else, there's no other place in the world. I've been to where there's more money in mining than, you know.
Really? You're from? Yeah. I look at that old girl and it's just like, Marty's cynical about it.
Well, I was more out of curiosity going through this process.
Well, you're the perfect person because you've been involved in this.
I gotta go back to the Very right.
Well, I haven't traveled.
No.
Like flying? Or
I've been to Tahoe and Ecuador.
No, I like to take Scotland's good at that.
Yeah, I've been told that by everybody. We, like, I think the point stop is doing that.
I did a big job in Trinidad because it escaped to Tobago for a bit of relief.
Well, I was thinking more of like the
I think every single person I talked to was like,
park on 2 ends.
I heard that from a lot of
It's the high two, they're
Right. It's institutional.
That's right. You can discuss it.
stupid.
I'll be efficient. Wait for both of them to 10 o'clock. Okay, it's being 10 o'clock, so we will begin. Good morning, everybody. We'll call our District of Tofino regular council meeting to order for Tuesday, November 12th at 10 a.m. and recognize that we're conducting our business today in Tlaloquet territory. And just take a chance to ask anyone who brought a cell phone with them to knock it on to vibrate. And if anybody needs to leave the room at any point, please do so at your convenience and just slip outside. And I just ask that the hallway is not a great place for conversation, so please take it outside and then it's a little less distracting for the rest of us. Okay, so let us begin. I'll ask first, please, for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And then we'll go through the minutes here. So first of all, the minutes of the regular council meeting that was held October 22nd, 2019.
Move adoption.
Second. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Were there any errors or omissions noted in the minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. I might slow down just a little bit today just because we have our newest member of council, who I will congratulate in a moment. We have minutes from the public hearing held October 22nd, 2019 regarding District of Tofino Bylaw 1270.
Move adoption.
Adoption, thank you. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions noted in those? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. And then opposed? Motion carried. And finally, we have the minutes of the special council meeting held October 31st, 2019.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions noted in those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. None opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, so we're going to go into the public comment on agenda items, and we have two. So our first is George Patterson to speak to item 8.2. This is an item that I have a conflict of interest in because George is my husband. So I am going to remove myself from the room, and Acting Mayor McQuaid will take over, and then I'll come back for the rest of it. Thanks. Mr. Patterson, I believe you have 2 minutes.
Is she gone?
She's going
Okay, thank you. I just want to provide you with some background that might help in your consideration of the application I have there. I don't think there's much to discuss on the need and support for the staff housing part of the application. At the time of rezoning back in 1997, 98, 99, staff housing was not much of an issue. And you can't think of everything. I didn't think to ask for it then, nor did council think to insist upon it, which it's doing in a lot of projects now. The issue around who may or may not spend the night at the Eagle Lodge hinges on some unclear wording in the bylaw. This lack of clarity resulted from the fact that at the time, Tofino did not have a professional planning staff. The district board, the planner from the regional district, when needed, when presented with my proposal, he said that he was too busy. As things were done in those days, an interested member of council wrote the bylaw. This might be a cautionary tale for councilors not to write bylaws themselves. So well-intentioned, knowledgeable, and experienced though he was, the bylaw crafted allows for a broad range of interpretation and misinterpretation. It is this uncertainty for me and for the district that I want to get clarified and made clear. I'm urging council to grant permission to proceed so that I can work with you and your staff to determine zoning language for overnight accommodation that provides certainty, is enforceable, and permits the property to continue to serve the municipality's vision for responsible, sustainable learning tourism. Thank you.
Thank you. Can somebody knock on the door and let Mayor Osborne back in, please?
All right, and our second speaker is Zach Cross, here to speak to item 6.1. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you. I guess I'll be somewhat brief, but I just wanted to speak to this one because it addresses the OCP, and I know that we are at some stage of revisioning it for the following one. And just as this particular one applies to South Tofino and the residential zoning that's in place there, that as far as I see it, there's 3 A1 zone properties that fall into South Tofino that are being held to a 5 acre or less property size when all of them are already below 5 acres, and they're surrounded by properties that are all RA2 zoning. So it feels to me as though potentially as we look to the new OCP in that South Tofino corridor, or whatever we're calling it, is that potentially those should be relooked at in terms of what exactly we're trying to gain by holding them from not being able to go into smaller zones, because they would obviously allow for more housing. And they are already surrounded by residential properties that are 1 acre apiece or thereabouts, and so yeah, it was just if we think that we need more housing in Tofino, it seems like that would be an area that we could allow some of the people who live in Tofino to help with affordable housing by being able to build houses on our properties. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's it for public comment and the mayor's report. I don't have a report today except to say congratulations to new councillor Dan Law, and welcome Dan to the table, and it's really great to see you, and congratulations on winning the election and completing our table of 7. And we promise to get you a brown and white nameplate as soon as possible instead of a paper one. But it's great to have you, so welcome aboard. All right, so we're going to go into our delegations next. And our delegation today, the only one we have is from Dylan Green to speak to the same item 6 that appears later on the agenda with the OCP review. So Dylan, you have up to 10 minutes, and we have the clocks there, and take it away. When you are done, then that's a chance for us to ask any questions that we might have.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing me to present this morning. I know all of you, but my name is Dylan Green, and my family lives here at 1374 Pacific Rim Highway. First off, I'd like to recognize that I think the staff report was really well written. I think there's a lot of effort and time went into the staff report for my application. In that staff report, there is an option that Mayor and Council can consider about creating a new neighborhood zone that sort of grabs a bunch of like properties together. And it's this sort of option that Mayor and Council can look at that I'm going to talk to you today. So how did we get here? This is the lot there, 1374 Pacific Rim Highway. We sort of enter the lot on that side. That's sort of our main driveway that has sort of the sewer, water. Also is a main driveway for the properties behind us as well. The previous owner had also put in another legal driveway on the other side of the lot with hydro and water and sewer as well. We are 2.05 acres. We're zoned A1, where the minimum lot size is 1.25 acres. So for us we really needed to be 2.5 acres if we were going to consider with our current zoning to become two properties. So that's why we looked to the OCP for sort of, guidance on, changes in the property. And this little finger here is all, as Zach said, in the South Rural OCP. But on this side and on sort of the Jensen side, that is the Cheshire neighborhood OCP. So had we been A1 on the other side of the road, then potentially we could have actually gone even denser than 1 acre. So, and even to the sort of the east, sort of downwind of our properties, you sort of have all these ones that are also in the South Rural, but they are also sort of all about 1 acre in size. So I think what staff were looking at was, so I recreated the slide from the report, and so that sort of circle is this proposed option that mayor and council can consider, is grabbing this group of very similar properties that are all about 1 acre in size and having a new neighborhood node of like properties. And I think that really speaks to how we feel the neighborhood is. That is sort of how it is today. The two lots that could change their size, would be my lot and my neighbor Brad, whose family lives next door. Brad's here as well. We're the only ones that are in the South Rural Tofino OCP. There are 2 2-acre lots down here, but again, they're in the Cheshire Beach neighborhood OCP, so they could already, if they did their A1 as well, but if they wanted to, they could look at their OCP neighborhood and potentially, rezone for a smaller lot size. So we're really talking about 2 lots here, my lot and Brad's lot, that so really is sort of an existing neighborhood as I see it. I think that's what staff was getting at with that circle. It's also important to note that my lot and Brad's lot are both the very first lots off the highway, so there wouldn't really be any increase in traffic. We already have our legal lot. Brad's lot, touches that shared driveway for the back lots as well, so there wouldn't be any new driveways onto the highway, which is nice. And also any new density would really be just touching our lots only, not our neighbors, because we're the first ones on the highway. So I think those are, pluses for mayor and council to consider, this new area that's sort of within the suggestion of a possible route mayor and council could take in the staff report. So I really think we are different than South Rural Tofino. There are no large private lots in this proposed area. They are all pretty much all 1 acre lots. The 2 lots that have the dotted lines, those are larger lots that I understand are in sort of the last PLA stage of becoming smaller lots. So really there are just 4 lots in total. Our 2 lots that are in South Rural Tofino and 2 lots across the road that are in the Cheshire Beach neighborhood OCP that could look at their OCP and go smaller. I did bring this application forward in early 2018. Dana was the original contact for me, and we decided to not move on because we knew that OCP was coming, and that was sort of the best approach. And then Dana left for the mountains, but I understand that OCP is back on track. But this summer, I just decided I really wanted to just get moving with it, and it seemed like such an obvious option, grabbing these existing lots that really are already, a neighborhood 1 acre lots, and I thought that this option was very worthy for consideration. So that's my presentation, and open to questions.
Thank you. Do any members of council have questions for Dylan? All right, thanks very much.
Okay, we're going to move into the correspondence section of the agenda, and the first is correspondence from Scott Fraser, our MLA, regarding the second intake of planning grants and space creation grants for childcare. Did anybody have any comments or questions out of that? I will say that in my meeting with Minister of State Chen, who is responsible for childcare, I did explain to her that for some local governments it's really difficult to meet the length of time that the government gives us to prepare that, and that the amount of work that goes into site selection and planning, and especially the kind of long-term planning, because you have to sign an agreement to operate it for 15 years, means that you want to do a really good, careful, considered job in your community, and that to meet their proposed deadline it's impossible, in fact. So she seems a bit surprised. But I was glad to give the feedback, and actually the regional district wrote a letter with a similar perspective. So, okay, our next item is a letter from Kyla Mallory regarding some changes in the district's daycare policy. Any questions that arose from that?
Any comments from staff on that?
Yeah, do you want to go there first? Sure. Yeah, Nyla, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So we made some changes to the parent handbook at the daycare earlier this year, where we had to scale back on the number of sick days and vacation days that were being offered. Part of the research we did was compared to other facilities in BC, it's difficult to do a direct comparison with our facility exactly. There's only one other facility owned by local government in Oak Bay, but in comparison to the other policies that were out there, ours continues to be quite flexible and continues to be quite generous with respect to how we schedule days in the center and how we offer flexible days or sick days at the center. So I feel as though our policies are more generous than others and somewhat in line with a few of them. So I feel quite comfortable with where the policy is at.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilor Anderson?
I'm just wondering, is that would you see the same kind of policy in the private sector daycare as well, or did staff have a look at compare that, or is it comparable at all?
Well, we mostly looked at licensed facilities, so they operate similar to ours. Not necessarily owned by local government, but licensed facilities. I didn't look at private facilities. Yeah, the child to caregiver ratio is quite different, and we have to make sure that we have a certain number of caregivers for 8 children with certain qualifications, and in order to meet that requirement, I felt it was more appropriate to look at other licensed facilities rather than smaller ones.
Pardon me just for a moment, but there's some beeping.
I know.
Does anybody know where that's coming from?
Coffee machine maybe?
I don't know.
Fries already?
Can you hear it, Doug?
Oh,
It sounds like
yeah,
it's out of the room though. Oh, it's George. Is it? Oh.
Get to the council meeting.
The Huawei technology fails. Back to the child care policies. Did that answer your question, Councillor Anderson?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Steer?
I think one of the beauties of having a municipally run, one of only 2 in the province, is that we can look at the flexibility factor, and I know there's some financial implications that might come with that, but I as one councillor would like to see that we do revisit that policy to see about keeping that maximum flexibility, because we are in a fairly unique situation in providing this service, and if we can continue to meet those needs in a flexible manner, I would be supportive of having a review of the policy once again.
No.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit more about how we schedule the center in comparison to other facilities, because we are on one very extreme side of the spectrum with respect to being flexible, and we have made that decision because of the type of community that we are. So typically a daycare center will offer part-time registration or full-time registration, and those that want full-time registration, meaning 5 days a week, will be able to bump the part-time registrants. We don't offer part-time or full-time registration. We offer a half-day or a full-day registration, which is extremely flexible in comparison. We also made a decision to subsidize the center with property taxation going from $0 to $100,000 in a year. So making some accommodations with having to do that, and then having to reduce the flexibility in terms of how many sick days can be offered for part-time registrants, helped us financially to make sure we didn't, we were falling in line with what we were required to in terms of budget. So it's not the $10,000 necessarily that we're looking at, it's the bigger picture of the budget for the center. And to put $100,000 or another $10,000, $110,000 towards a center is a big jump already to go to $100,000. So when we made modifications to the center's policy, we had to make sure that it worked for staffing levels, it worked for licensing regulation, it worked for the budget, which was one consideration. It wasn't the only thing that we looked at when we reviewed the handbook and policies for.
And that was my next question. What was the stimulus for the review of the policy?
Yeah, so we did look at the financial impact of offering that number of days for each family, and it was approximately $10,000 that the center lost in previous years. And we're also seeing a reduction in fees We're unsure exactly why, but we're guessing it has to do with demographics currently with the age requirement for what's required in town today for childcare. We're not seeing full registration, or we're not at capacity in the center. So.
And just in one more point, I know that Marcia and with the Clackwood, that we are having the study that they put forward. Would you have any insight as to whether that might help in the discussions around the change of our policy in terms of the needs assessments that are currently going on, and how this policy, I would have thought, because we didn't know ahead of time, but before we engaged in that policy review, we might, and I don't know the timing on that, as whether that review would have been a more appropriate time to have made these policy changes.
So, yes, so Marcy DeWitt and her team are just completing the action plan for creating new spaces in the region. So they've looked at the entire regional district, what is currently being served by facilities and what the gaps are. And then they're going to make some recommendations about how that could be filled. I don't think any of the answers will be, it's not like rocket science. We have a pretty good idea of what's going on. And I think what I'm hoping they'll be able to address a little bit in their report is the different approaches that private operators versus municipal or local government operated facilities, and larger facilities versus family-owned facilities have to contemplate. And I don't think the results are probably going to help us tremendously, in the sense that I think what our staff is saying to us is that when you operate a childcare center in a municipal environment, there's just some realities that we have to deal with. And one of them is we chose as a council to pay a living wage to all of the workers there. So we raised their wages, and that had an impact on the taxation that we had to draw from the rest of Tofino to support the operation of the center. The second thing is that we do have a collective agreement with CUPE, and so we have some things that we need to be mindful there. And we don't have as much flexibility as a private operator has to say when somebody phones up and says, my child is sick and can't come today. It's not as easy to just say to the staff there, well, actually we don't need you today. You can stay home too. They still have to be there, and we still have to pay and operate the center. So I really think what our staff is trying to do is find a balance between the reality of us running the local government running the center, and some flexibility, enough flexibility to make it reasonable for families and parents. But I recognize, and as the letter writer recognizes, and I know our staff recognizes, it's not as flexible as many community members wish we could have. And because we're strapped for spaces, especially at the infant toddler side, there aren't that many options. I mean, over 50% of families who want to put their child in care in Tofino are not putting their child in care because there just aren't the spaces there. So I think that's, a review of the policy is not something I think that I really feel is necessary at this time, because I think that's exactly what our staff did after we made the decision to help underwrite the costs of the center. And really, I think if our staff did review the policy and come back to us, all they're going to ask us is, okay, well, how much is council willing to put in to continue to support the center running for the 16 lucky families that get to put their kids there? This is not easy. Yeah.
Which begs the question of a larger question that we may have to address, and I don't know when the appropriate time is, is a review of the municipality's role in providing childcare as one of only two in the province.
Right.
And I don't know the forum or the place or the time to have that, but it's come up several times in the 1 year we've been on council, that there may be a time where we have to sit down and address this issue a little more fully, and maybe at the budget time it might be an appropriate time to have that discussion.
Yeah.
I'm willing to withdraw the request for a review.
It's okay, there's no motion or anything.
I know, but I just don't want it to be left off the table again.
No.
Or not again, but and that we formalize some way to have the much bigger picture look, and maybe Marcia's.
I think Marcia's report will help with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the discussion. Any other questions? No. Okay. All right, the next letter is from the Alberni Clackwood Health Network, and it has an update about what's going on and a note about the fact that it is recruiting new partners to sit at their table of partners for 2019. Any questions or comments that came from this? by way of interest, I sit on it because by virtue of being at the regional district, and the regional district appointed me to it, so, yeah. Okay, then we will keep moving on. So the next item is correspondence from Dom Domick, Executive Director of Surf Canada, looking for a request. His request is a letter of support for the 2020 event in Parks Canada territory, land, park.
I'll move to write a letter of support.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Did anybody have any questions about that? No? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. I thought it was great that they included their economic impact assessment. It was really interesting to see an event look at the value of it to the wider economy. It'd be neat to have more events be able to do that. All right, so our next letter is from Linda Shaw, local resident, regarding resident parking signs and her request that the district consider in the Lone Cone neighborhood putting resident-only parking signs on within that neighborhood. Before we start, maybe I'll just look to our staff and see, did you have any comment? I certainly have an opinion, but I want to hear what you might think first.
It's not the first time we've received a letter of this sort of
Right.
concern. Vehicles being parked long-term in residential communities. I think it probably happens all around town. We're looking at options right now of reviewing our overall parking plan and seeing what the options are. One thought maybe limiting parking for 24 hours unless it's in an offshore parking permitted space. So when I spoke with the letter writer, she let me know what her specific concerns were around the vehicles that were there. And so for these particular concerns, they're all vehicles associated with people living on Strawberry Island or Nielsen Island that are parking close by and accessing the water fairly close to where they're parking.
Right.
So I think that's important to acknowledge that it's offshore parking is all sorts of areas in the vicinity here. But anyhow, so those vehicles are there repeatedly for weeks at a time, and we're making an effort to contact the registered owners to just discuss some parking options for them that may have less of an impact on the community. And there's a few that are associated with vehicles used for camping that have already received multiple tickets as well too. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Thoughts?
I was just curious, Brent, do we have any resident-only parking areas in Tofino? I didn't think, yeah, I didn't think so.
Anyone? Yeah, Councillor Chalmers?
I'm just comfortable waiting as they review it anyway before we make a decision. I think they're looking at it anyway.
How long is that? When do you expect to make some movement there?
To go through it properly, it may take a little bit of time to work with the manager of planning and sustainability just to see what the previous reviews have been of the parking plan and that sort of stuff.
Right.
And move forward possibly with a consultant to see what their suggestions are.
Well, am I correct that when we've looked at parking in the past, we've always looked at the downtown core? I think this is the first time we've had, and Olsen Road, we've had members who live on Olsen Road, residents who live on Olsen Road talk to us about parking there. And it's actually kind of the same problem because it's probably using the same dock and then walking out. But we've never looked at the Lone Cone neighborhood before, have we?
Not in my time with the municipality.
Yeah.
It's not a new issue. It's been something that's going on for a while, but I do think we do tend to focus, on the core because that's where I'd say the bigger issue is. But
well, to my way of thinking, it is really worth looking at, and it's probably worth looking at several neighborhoods in Tofino because these kinds of conflicts of use seem to be coming up a little bit more and more. Of does a vacation rental have all of the parking it's supposed to have, and is that bleeding out into the street, and does it create safety issues and the things that residents bring up? And the notion that sometimes you can use signage in a way that helps people self-enforce a little bit better, but doesn't actually draw too much on the resources of the municipality and having to go out and make sure, well, it says resident only, are you really a resident? But I think the letter writer brings up some good concerns, and I'm glad that staff will take a look at it. So we'll just leave it at that. Councillor Anderson?
My comment on it is that I don't think that residential signage or residential only parking signage would really solve the problem. And also I would probably anticipate that more and more neighborhoods would want that if we started it in one neighborhood. And in fact, some residents have decided to post their own no parking signs on public parking. So I believe publicly owned land is for use by all of the public and not just maybe the people that live next to it. So it's a management issue, and we always continue to look at and sort of tweak the way we manage parking. And that's what I look forward to doing more of. But it's, as Tofino becomes more and more used, these problems become more widespread.
Thank you. Okay, all right, thanks everybody. The next item is the letter from the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities regarding the province's invitation to participate in BC's Old Growth Strategic Review that takes place in Port Alberni. And I think Councillor Steer, I know Councillor Steer is very interested in going. I think I'm already in town that day and plan to go too. But take it away, Councillor Steer.
I was just going to motion that up to X number of councillors whoever might express interest to be authorized to attend the Old Growth Strategic Review scheduled for January 16th, 2020 in Port Alberni, BC, and being reimbursed for costs in accordance with the District of Tofino Council Remuneration Bylaw number 1254, 2018.
Thank you. Well, we don't have a number yet, so we can't quite say the name. Who's interested in going? Councillor Law?
I won't be here, so.
Potentially interested. Say up to 4, and then does anybody object to that? All right, and then we'll just determine later who it is. Doesn't have to be. Okay, all right, go ahead.
We can fill in the X with a 4.
You can fill in the X, that would be awesome.
So everything I said, we'll fill in the X with a 4.
All right, thank you. Is there a seconder? Okay.